Last things first, you already win. You already him. You don't gotta pretend. Fuck them. You already king. You stay real. You confident in your skin. It's all now. Sit in the power that you already in. This the story of a master from a true Bedouin, far away from home than few ever been. First round pick, league of the smooth gentleman. The game rigged like 50 said it's a cruel sentiment. I'm from the era when lyrics and bars is over everything. 5-star veteran. You couldn't walk in my fucking shoes or carry them. Excuse my borderline is very thin. Been married to the game like ever since maybe 2010. I realized most of y'all not serious. Point blank period. I flex and twist necks like cherry stems. Thought he was buried, but there he is, a new narrative. I keep winning. They not used to what you bring. I keep winning. Don't even know what they looking at. I keep winning. Yo. What's up, everybody? It is July 15th. This is another episode of How Billy Sees It. And I'm very excited. We have a guest today that I'm going to introduce, and we're going to have a great hour with them. We're going to talk about their book and the projects that they're working on, and talk a bit about politics as well. So let me just jump right in and get them in. My guy, Bill Fletcher Jr. Hello. Hey. Bill?
I'm here.
There you are. What up? Okay. I couldn't hear you
All
at
right.
first. How
Okay.
are you, man? Thanks for joining us.
I'm really glad to be here, man, and I'm doing all right, all things considered, you know.
Yeah, things are wild. It's an interesting time that we're in, and I find myself struggling sometimes to deal with the full, all-encompassing, like what's going on in full, and then we still have to kind of operate. We still have to operate in different in different spaces and handle things in particular. And so we're gonna talk about all of that, but I wanted to start with your book, The Man Who Changed Colors.
All right.
When did you write The Man Who Changed Colors?
So, The Man Who Changed Colors is my second novel.
Okay.
The first novel was The Man Who Fell from the Sky, and that was published in 2018.
Okay.
And I got such great feedback that people said to me, well, there's got to be a sequel.
Yes.
So I started working on a sequel, I want to say the fall of 2019, I think.
Okay.
And it was interesting, Billy, because the story, the way I write, I film stories in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think about it as if it was a camera, as if I'm like creating a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about what the characters look like, the locations, everything. And this particular story came quickly to me. And so I finished it. I think, the first draft in late 2020.
First draft of this book.
Yeah, The Man Who Changed Colors.
Okay.
And it was actually published, 2021, I can't remember, but it was published in 2023.
Okay.
And it's it's fun. I mean, it's a lot of work when you're writing fiction.
Yeah.
Well, when you're writing nonfiction too. But it was a lot of work, and but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed putting the stories together. I enjoyed learning how to write fiction. When I gave my publisher the first draft of my first book, he and I met, and he said to me after looking at it, he said, "This is a very good first draft." And that was really interesting phrasing because he was basically telling me that there was work that had to be done.
Right.
And so we did a lot of editing, and in the second book, less editing because I'd gotten better.
Right. Right.
And I just finished the first draft of the third novel,
Yes.
and I've given it to a few people, including my wife and daughter, and I'm asking them to read it with the intention of giving me a thumbs up or thumbs down, and determining whether or not I go forward with it because it's a lot of work,
Yeah.
when you do it.
I'm sure it is. Is the third book the same character, David Gomes?
Same character, yeah.
Okay. All right.
David Gomes, his wife Pamela,
Yeah.
and it takes place. So the first book took place in 1970 and 71 in Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
Hmm.
The second book took place 1978 and 79, also in Cape Cod,
Hmm.
but also in New Bedford, Massachusetts. The third book takes place in Boston,
Okay.
1981 and 82. And so in the second book, Gomes is married, and but it begins with the death of a Cape Verdean immigrant shipyard worker
Right.
in Quincy, Massachusetts. And excuse me, in July of 1978, he falls to his death.
Right.
That's fictional. Although, as I think I told you, Billy, on July 14th, 1978, I fell 20 feet in that same shipyard.
Oh
And
wow.
so that's part of the inspiration of the book.
That's where these are the questions I'm trying to get into, man. I wanted to get into the choices in
Mhm.
terms of the date, the time, the place, and more. So no, I don't recall you telling me this. Okay, so you were working at a shipyard and fell in the same way, and you created a fictional detective journalism story around that experience.
Pretty much.
Okay.
I, um, I graduated from college. I was very active as a high school student, a college student, and got involved in the labor movement. And I went to work as a welder in a shipyard. And shipyards were at the time the second most dangerous industry in the country. Very dangerous, so dangerous that if you thought about it too much while you were there, you couldn't do any work.
Mm,
But that also led to the problem of making mistakes because you take certain things for granted. So I was standing somewhere on some uh, wooden planks that were on some metal stiffeners, but they weren't tied down.
mhm.
And I lost my balance and I fell. And I would have been killed if I hadn't been knocked unconscious immediately as I fell back.
Wow.
Um, yeah.
How old are you?
So, um, so in my story, which takes place a week or two after I fell, I don't use my name, but I
Yeah.
make reference to an accident. Um, this fictional Cape Verdean immigrant falls to his death.
Yep.
So it's assumed at first that he was killed in an industrial accident. And David Gomes, the hero of my stories, is a journalist in the small paper in Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
Right.
And he is asked by someone from who was involved in health and safety work if he would write a story about the, this guy's death and the dangers of shipyards. So
Right.
he begins the investigation only to discover or come to the conclusion that this probably wasn't an accident. But then he comes to even more, develops more questions about who this guy was that
Yeah.
fell to his death. And if it wasn't an accident, why would someone have killed him?
Right. Yeah, I think you set it up really nicely, man. The every couple of as you go as David Gomes goes through this, his investigation, the stakes just keep rising throughout the end of the until we get to the end of the book. And I want to get into that, like his first off, the stakes keep rising, and then the scope of what's happening keep rising. It starts
Yes,
from a potential accident to maybe foul play, and then the the level of the foul play and who's really coordinating things and trying to get him. People are actually trying to like I don't know, get benefit from his investigation. They're trying to learn, like trying to like coax him to learn more so they can get stuff from him.
that's
Like
right.
I actually think some of the characters like Sousa and Hart, did you have any inspiration for them, or were they just you just kind of completely made them up?
Oh no, almost all of the characters are composites of people that I've known, right? So they're not identical. It's not
Yeah.
like I'll give you an example. So David Gomes, as a character, was inspired by a Cape Verdean journalist I know,
Mm,
but David Gomes is not the same guy.
right.
Some people thought David Gomes is me,
Right.
but no, he bears a resemblance, but he's not me, you
Yeah.
know. And so Hart, I'm glad you mentioned Hart because people like Hart.
I like
Almost
Hart.
everybody who's read the book says to me that they really like Hart. And
Yeah.
to give you a little thing, Hart is in the third book.
Okay.
I bring him back in the third book.
Okay.
Hart, it's funny about writing, bro. It's like there's some, I had an outline about what I was going to write, but there's something happens when you write fiction, and what can happen is all of a sudden it feels like your fingers are on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And so Heart was not in my original story.
Mm,
But at a certain point, I realized I needed Heart.
mm-hmm.
I needed that character
Yeah.
because the my original idea about how the story ended would have not involved Heart.
So in terms of that, like his expertise, what he brought to the table, Gomes would have just figured that out with his wife, kind of deal.
No, it was a sort of different kind of ending.
Oh, okay.
It would have, without giving away everything. Let me just say that in the original idea, Gomes would have come to a uneasy truce with the people that were after him.
Right. Okay.
And but what I decided at a certain point I wasn't happy with that.
Mm,
That such a truce would have been uneasy, but as you know from the characters that were after him,
yeah.
they were completely untrustworthy.
Yeah. Exactly.
And that was why I realized I needed Hart, because
Gotcha.
Hart introduces an element to this
Mm-hmm.
that
Lets them handle
Holmes
it.
was not prepared to undertake.
Got it. Yeah. It's funny because for sure I would have assumed that Gomes was you. Like, you
Mhm.
know what I mean? Like in terms of your inspiration. I see him through the story. I like Gomes as well. I like Hart, I like Gomes because I see him as like a serious dude who's in a situation and he's doing the best he can. And he's a good guy who also has some principles as a journalist. He sees himself as someone who has to get to the bottom of things. He wants to
That's
understand reality,
right.
which is something
That's
I
right.
play with a lot. How do you define? Because this is a journalist in a different kind of vein than the way we kind of throw that word around. How do you define journalist?
Um, a journalist is an individual who investigates the facts of a situation and knows how to put it together as a story, which means by definition that they're going to lend an interpretation to the facts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that interpretation one may not agree on. The question, though, is whether they've got the facts correct.
Right.
A journalist may also be an opinion writer, but an opinion writer is not necessarily a journalist, at least in my way of looking at things. I mean, people might disagree with me.
I like that.
And yeah. So, as you said, I mean, what Gomes works for a small progressive newspaper in Hyannis, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. And he is a leftist, but not a leftist in the same way that I am. In other words, I have a certain ideological orientation. Gomes doesn't have a clear ideological orientation, but he's on the left,
Hmm.
and and he's trying to figure a lot of things out. In the first book, part of what he's trying to figure out is his relationship with Pamela, and the fact that he's an attractive guy, and there are these women that are very interested in him, and these are really interesting opportunities for him, and he has to decide how to deal with that.
Yeah.
Um, in the second book, he's made a decision
Right. Right.
in terms of marrying Pamela, and they are soulmates.
So
And so there are certain things that I draw from my life and my relationship with my wife.
yeah.
There's a particular scene you may remember where um, Pamela basically sits him down and tells him, "This is not the way we're going to continue acting. I'm your partner."
Yeah.
Right? Remember that?
Yeah.
And that was inspired by my wife.
I love that.
Yeah, yeah,
I actually have a question right here for that. Actually,
yeah. Go ahead.
um, I mean, I just in terms of like I have a very creative and outspoken and powerful wife that I love, and
Mhm.
I got to hang with you and your wife, and I wondered about that. I think a lot of times when we read about male protagonists, the Indiana Jones and like James Bond types, they can be um, bachelors, and like women aren't their problem at all. But just wanted to touch on like the fact that Pamela was instrumental, not just in like getting Gomes together, like getting him together when things were kind of crazy, like really like holding him down and being a support, but also she put in work. And
Right,
I thought that was interesting.
right. No, thank you. So just going back to the first book a second to respond to this. Um, in the first book, when you meet Gomes, kind of mid to late 20s, and he is unsure of a number of things. And one is he ready to really commit to this woman he loves? A second thing he's unsure of is whether she's willing to commit to him.
Pamela.
And then you have on top of that that there are these other women that he keeps running across that are opportunities. And so he's grappling with who is he in this very sexual environment.
Hmm.
Um, and in some ways, Billy, that's why I wrote the second one to basically say he made a decision about what he was going to do with his life. And Pamela is central. But as you know in the story, it's complicated
Yeah.
because of his relationship with his boss
Right. Exactly.
and
That
and how that all plays out.
that's what I wanted to know with Jacqueline. So is Jacqueline in the first one? Is she one of those women?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
oh yeah, she's in the first one, and the how can I put it? So she's in the first one, and what I had to decide in the first one was whether Gomes was going to get involved with her. And I went back and forth about that with my publisher, and we decided that he wouldn't.
Okay.
Um, and in the second one, I want to say because in the first one, he and Pamela break up. Now at the very end of the book, it's
Uh-oh. We lost Bill. Give us a second. Oh, let me show him back on stream. Hey, we're back.
Okay.
Okay.
So at the end of the first book, it's 2004. It jumps from like 71 to 2004. So you
Okay.
know that Gomes and Pam are together.
Yes.
Um, I wanted to, in the second book, sort of explain how they got back together. But also, it turned out that while they were separated, because they had broken up,
Yeah.
that he got involved with Jacqueline, but that became complicated.
Yeah.
But in being complicated, it was one of these things, Billy, where feelings don't just vanish. They almost
Right.
never just vanish, even when you're furious with somebody.
Yeah.
And I wanted the reader to treat Gomes as a real person, the kind of person that you could actually run into, talk, and feel like they're a legitimate human being.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciated all throughout, man, the way you depicted the different settings, the descriptive way you set up the positioning of people, and there's all very, very skillful, and it
Thank
was
you.
fun to read, and the tensions, like I said, this protagonist, Gomes, he's not just dealing with the mystery of what he's dealing with, or the bad guys who are trying to kill him, or figuring out how deep the rabbit hole goes. He's also dealing with his wife, who he loves,
Right.
who's not a pushover,
That's right.
who wants to be talked to and wants to be like brought into stuff. And he continues to like what I found is like he's grappling with this kind of masculine, like, I can handle it,
Right.
I don't want to trouble my wife. And she's like,
That's right.
yo, no, like, that's the wrong framing for this. Like, I'm
Right.
I thought that was interesting.
That was part of the politics of the book. The book, when people say, "Well, what was this book?" I said, "This is a book about race, justice, revenge, and Cape Verdean Americans." And but it's a book also about politics,
Yeah.
and with a small p, and the
Right.
politics of a relationship. It's a book. Both of them are books about things going on among Cape Verdeans. In the second book, it's about the aftermath of Cape Verde becoming independent of Portugal, and issues of the right wing.
Yeah.
So what I
And
try to do in both books is integrate politics without hitting people over the head with it.
yeah.
Um, in fact, I got into an argument with a couple of people about the first book who felt that it was too sexual and
Mm.
that my description of these women was too sexual. And I said to them, this book takes place, the first one takes place in 1771. I said, do you remember, if you were old enough, how sexual the environment was? And do you remember how sexual you were in your 60s, or are you too old to remember?
Mm.
I actually told people that, man, because it's like I remember my
Yeah.
20s,
Uh-huh.
and it's like very sexual time, everything. And I wanted to be real. I mean,
Yeah.
this wasn't like a treatise on the question of male supremacy or something. I mean, this
Yeah.
is a novel
Yeah.
that has politics in it.
And politics is everywhere. And
Right.
really, I really appreciate that, because I do think I think there's something about, even in fiction, the depictions we want to tell. I find
Mhm.
myself making music and writing things myself, and grappling with like the image of what I want to portray versus like what is the full truth,
Right.
and trying to be as genuine as possible, because I think there's real value in that. And I think a lot of times we do ourselves a disservice by telling these half stories. We want to paint things as like, oh no,
That's right.
but actually tell the whole truth.
That's right.
Um,
There's I got into thing with my publisher. Publisher's great. His name is Tim Sheard, head of Hardball Press, and there's a small press out in New York. And I agreed with him on almost all of his edits. I'm someone, editors always tell me I'm easy to work with, and I respect editors. Some writers don't. They treat editors very badly. I respect editors. Well, but I got into a disagreement with him
Mm-hmm.
because he wanted Gomes to be more like a detective. Like, I don't know whether you've read Walter Mosley and his Easy Rawlings series, but um,
I haven't.
or when I was much younger, there was Rockford Files on television, one of my favorite detective shows, and and I said to my publisher, I said, Tim, Gomes is not a detective.
Mm.
He is a guy working in a small paper in a small town in a small state. And I said, I'll tell you the way to think about Gomes and what I wanted the readers to pick up on. Let's say that tomorrow I said to you, Tim, the Gambino crime family put out a hit on you. What would you do? Right? You wouldn't act like some super detective because you don't have that experience. You'd probably be scared to death and trying to figure out how you're going to navigate that. I said, that's what I wanted when people looked at Gomes. I wanted them to see a journalist who's not a detective, who has to figure this stuff out as he's going along. At certain points, he's scared to death about what's going to happen, whether he's making the right choices.
Yeah.
This is what I think makes him a more realistic character.
Right. Right. I mean, down to his dating issues, down to the fact, I mean, he's just um, he's a guy, he's
Right,
not
right.
some dude who's dodging bullets, even though he did survive a couple of things in this
Yeah, he
book.
did. Right. But he's not John Shaft.
He's not
You
John
know,
Shaw.
it's like he's just a different. This is important to me. I was very much influenced by the cinematic genre called film noir,
Mm-hmm.
which was post World War II, and um, up until like the early 50s. And what I liked about film noir, think about people like Humphrey Bogart, Robert Mitchum, that they were complicated heroes. They weren't perfect.
Right.
They often did kind of things that you wouldn't think would necessarily be all on the up and up. And that complication is what I found interesting. And
Yeah.
I wanted Gomes to be complicated. But as it turns out, my publisher didn't want him to be too complicated.
Right.
So we had to compromise.
Gotcha. Well, I don't know where you feel. I think it was good. The second book to me felt really interesting. I mean, even down to the in the final chapters with Jacqueline and sort of he really got tested again, really tempted to do something that his wife wouldn't be happy about. But you see,
Right,
to put it lightly,
right.
all while also being like like a hit, like potentially a hit job for the mob, essentially.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but he ends up navigating it really well. He ends up like I think doing the right things and maintaining like like a real integral like the integrity with his wife is intact. You know what I mean? These are all things I really appreciate
Thank
as
you.
well.
Well,
Uh,
let me just say to your viewers and listeners, if you guys read the book, the second book, hopefully you read the first one too. When you get to the end, I'd be really interested in how you feel about it and how you feel about Hart and the relationship between Hart, Pamela, and Gomes.
mhm.
And that's all I'm going to say because otherwise I'll be giving away the end of the book, which I had fun writing, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I was trying to think too in terms of like the plan. Well, we don't want to get too much into this, huh? I'm trying to think
Mm,
how to even navigate this. I'm
okay.
trying to think about your motivations and where you came up with like the scenarios.
Um,
You just
I dream a lot.
hmm
I always have. I've always come up with stories. The It's an interesting question. Um, so, for example, the Irish guy that Gomes meets,
hmm
right? Um, he was in part based on a guy that I used to work with,
Okay.
and the incident that takes place in that club in Dorchester, where he's shooting pool,
Yeah.
that was based on an actual place in Dorchester that I went
Nice.
into once. That was a white only place, and so it's like there are these different pieces that I pulled together in order to make that happen. Um, I decided that one of the things I wanted to get at, Billy, is that who is good and who is bad doesn't always break down very cleanly. So the the character that's killed in the beginning, in the one hand, seems like he was probably a very nice guy and soft spoken, didn't, you know, wasn't acting up. But then it turns out there's this whole other part of him.
Right.
And I liked playing with that. That you have people. It actually came up at the end of the first book that people are not always who they appear to be, and they can sometimes wear a very convincing mask, so convincing that you can't seem to take the mask off of them. So that's what I wanted the readers to grapple with.
Yeah.
Like, what do people think about this guy having gotten whacked?
Right.
You
That's true
know?
for a lot of the characters in there. I mean, down to
Yes.
even Hart. I mean, down
Right.
to um who connected him with Hart again? What's that gentleman's name?
Hank.
Hank. Yeah, down to Hank. Like who are these
Right.
people? But you see these genuine efforts that come from love and people have particular skill sets, but
That's
like
right.
it's like what's going on there?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about you said you dream, and I think that's
Yeah.
dope. Um the power of dreams. You are someone a lot of your life would be categorized more in the activist, labor organizer, writer in terms of nonfiction,
That's right.
former trans Africa president. You're someone who tries to bring words and language to what is real. And so
Mhm.
what drew you to write the first fiction book and to continue now into book 3?
I Interesting question. Um, in that there were a few different things. There were things that I wanted to say that could best be said through fiction. And in part because there were audiences that I wanted to reach that were not necessarily going to read nonfiction. Like Billy, some people said, well, if you wanted to write something about Cape Verdeans, why didn't you just like write a nonfiction book about Cape Verdeans?
Mm.
I said, for a very simple reason. No one would read it. I said, I mean, look, let's be real. I'm
Yeah.
not an expert,
Yeah.
but the other part of it is that there's things that some people will read in fiction, and after they read it, then they might go back to nonfiction,
That's right.
and that's what I've encountered. That there
Yes.
have been people that have read one or both of the books, and they'll say, I didn't know anything about Cape Verdeans, and after reading your books, I started looking them up, and it's wow, what an interesting history.
Right.
And that's when I say, bingo, that worked.
Right.
And so that was part of what inspired it. What also inspired me was Walter Mosley. When I was running Trans Africa Forum, Walter Mosley was on my board. We got to know each other. And I was very fond of Walter. And I had started reading his books in the Easy Rollins series and then a couple of the others. And it really is an excellent writer. And I was inspired by the way he used murder mysteries to offer political commentary without beating people over the head with the politics.
Right.
And I decided I wanted to try. So the first time I tried was back in 2008, 2007, 2008.
Mm.
And I wrote a manuscript. It was never published. I gave it to an agent asking whether she would read it. And she said yes. She read it, and a few weeks later, she called me back and she ridiculed it. And there was nothing she liked about it. And her final words to me were, "When you go back to writing nonfiction, call me."
Mm.
It's like, whoa,
Wow.
you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, if I tell you, man, if I hadn't enjoyed writing it as much as I did, I would have been crushed. I'd be about this big. But I had enjoyed it. But I left it alone. And then a few years later, I came up with the story that became The Man Who Fell from the Sky. And I was interested in Cape Verdeans. And I was interested in a certain moment, which is why I picked 7071 for the first book, when the kind of political identity consciousness of Cape Verdeans is undergoing a shift. The Cape Verdeans were the first post-1492 African population to come to North America voluntarily. And they came from the Cape Verde archipelago that is 500 miles, give or take, off the coast of West Africa. And it was controlled by Portugal. And they came as whalers and fishermen and then settled first in southeastern Massachusetts or southeastern New England. And their identity was complicated because they had not been slaves. It was complicated by the fact that they spoke Portuguese or Criollo, that they were mainly Roman Catholics, and that Portuguese white supremacy, as was Spanish, was very different from British white supremacy. So in British white supremacy, the one drop rule existed. One drop African blood and you were black, and therefore you could be enslaved. But with the Portuguese and the Spanish, they did not have a one drop rule. They had a system of gradations of color, basically, and different kind of blood. And the Spanish had a whole series of names for virtually every intermixing you can imagine. It's a system that's called Las Castas, wow. Castas. And you can look it up. It became an art form. And so for example, the two names that we're familiar with are mulatto and mestizo. Mm-hmm. Mulatto is European, African, mestizo, European and Indian. But the Spanish had names for everything else. They had names for what happens if a mulatto mixes with a mestizo. There's a name for it, right? Mm-hmm. And they created this whole racial pyramid as a very effective mechanism for divide and conquer. And that's partly, they pulled that off because initially there weren't a lot of European settlers that come to to the Americas. It's mainly mercenaries, and then they start enslaving the Indians and then bringing over the Africans. Now the British, because were further down the road in the development of capitalism, had an excess population, and they moved some of those people to Northern Ireland, and then they moved others into the Americas. And the British did not need a mixed race population to control their entire workforce because they used poor whites. So you had the Indians, the Africans, and the poor whites. And the privilege that the poor whites had was that they could never be slaves. All right, so the Cape Verdeans come over here and they encounter this African population that was mainly Protestant, English speaking, and most of whom had been slaves or the descendants of slaves.
Right.
And these populations had trouble mixing.
Mm.
Many of the Cape Verdeans refused to call themselves Black
Mm-hmm.
or Afro American in the late 19th and early 20th century, or
Mm-hmm.
Negro or whatever. They would insist we're Portuguese. And some of them, even if they were as dark as coal, would describe themselves as white.
Mm.
Well, by the late 60s, the Black freedom movement in the United States, combined with the national liberation struggle in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde against the Portuguese, was starting to change the consciousness of the Cape Verdeans in the United States. That's why I situated the story then, because I'm dealing with the way that this population is changing the way it thinks about itself.
Right. Yeah, you dealt with that at a few junctures, a couple of interactions with people. Very some of it were just subtle, and others were front and center for a couple of pages. And but it was
Okay.
part of what was going on. Um, this is a great segue, actually.
Mhm.
Just talking about language and identity, and even this distinction when you see the Cape Verdean who comes over and doesn't want to claim the Black identity, the Black American identity. In that context, you can understand from where that comes,
Right.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, this just blows my mind. The ways we have been categorized and the way that the identities that we hold and how we classify ourselves. I find myself in a place. I think we're in a period where a lot of these definitions are all of the ways that we think about ourselves are being challenged in this moment.
Yes.
Perhaps it always was the case, right? There were always this opportunity to rethink, but I feel like we're in a pivotal historical moment, and part of that history, it's not just about Trump and Biden, and it's not just about the left and the right. There's like a lot of fundamental ways of thinking and talking about ourselves that are up for grabs, that are being retooled and challenging things and are making people uncomfortable and having political ramifications.
Very true. And I would say that this always happens. So we were called freedmen, and some were called Africans, and then colored, um, Afro American became a term used much earlier than I thought. I thought that was a term invented in the 60s, but it wasn't. Um, Negro, right? And so you have this evolution. One of the things that's interesting about this moment that relates directly to what you're saying is that there's a kind of what I call political identity of the oppressed versus the oppressor that transcends race. But there's a particular identity issue for younger people of African descent who are so-called mixed race.
Mm.
So here's the funny example. So you see what I look like.
Mhm.
And so clearly, I've got a lot of mixture in me.
Mhm.
But growing up, I never identified as mixed race. I grew up as a Negro and then Afro American and then Black and African American, right? There was never a question. My great grandparents on my mother's side, my great grandfather was a preeminent pre Harlem Renaissance poet, author, anthologist, so powerful in literary circles, they called him the tyrant of Boston because he could make or break people's literary career.
Mm.
He was an inspiration and a mentor to many of the people in the Harlem Renaissance, like Elaine Locke, Countee Cullen, uh, and others. If you looked at a picture of him, his name is William Stanley Braithwaite. You look at this guy and you're going to say he's black, and his wife, Emma Kelly Braithwaite, it's like you look at them and it's like these two nice old white folks.
Mhm. Mm. Hold on.
Yet
This is your
my great
great
grandparents on my
grandfather.
mother's side, my
Got you.
mother's parents,
Got you. Okay. Okay. Okay.
and Braithwaite, they never tried to pass. And you just look at their picture, Billy. I
Yeah.
mean, they could have gotten away with it,
Yeah.
right? They never tried to pass. They ended their lives in 409 Edgecombe Avenue in Harlem,
Mm.
in what's called Sugar Hill, in a building that has now been declared a historic site because of all of the famous people that lived there. At some point, Paul Robeson, Walter White,
Mm.
Du Bois,
Mm.
right? I mean, all these people were there. And
Oh, hold on. We'll get Bill right back. All right, we're back.
okay, so many of them were friends of my great grandparents. So I'm growing up as a light skinned African American.
Yeah.
And it would never cross my mind.
Yeah.
But now the identity thing has become much more complicated than when I was a kid. And
Absolutely.
part of that is generational, I think. Part of it is a refusal by many people to accept categories,
Mm-hmm.
which I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it can be running away from your African blood,
Mm-hmm.
which I also see among many Latinos and Latinas.
Yeah.
Um, and so among Cape Verdeans, you had that.
Yeah.
Also, you had people that adamantly denied that they were black.
Yeah. I mean, look, I've come to terms with myself as a light skinned black man, but growing up in Brooklyn, New York, I never felt that. I was really never confronted with that until I moved to Washington, D.C. and started to get called light skinned nigger
Mhm.
and red bone and a yellow
Right,
bone and stuff like that.
right.
And these distinctions are manifested from all kinds of things. They have political connotations. They have assumptions about our nature,
Yeah,
as a light skinned person, there's all kinds of weird stuff, and I find that the complexity of it is a real challenge because as we try to talk about, let's say, a Pan African sort of
mhm,
consciousness, we talk about consciousness. It really makes it difficult to build on the same platforms that I was taught, and I still have a sense of a Pan African, the need for that, the need for an awareness that encompasses um, the diaspora broadly, includes Black Americans, African Americans, and Africans and Caribbean Americans in particular. That's like um, part of it. But I just feel like we've lost so much ground on that consciousness. Um,
I
I-
think that black is a political color. Black is the color of the racially oppressed. And one of the things that's really interesting, if you look around the world in anti colonial fights, in places ranging from the Philippines to um, the Caribbean to South Africa, um, people would, our oppressors would often view us, regardless of our actual colors, as black.
right.
But in a number of places, you particularly saw this in the Anglophone world, there was this, like Steve Biko in South Africa said, black is not a phenotype. It really is a consciousness. And that is what influenced me growing up. I
Yeah.
mean, when I caught hell when I got to high school. I grew up in Manhattan in the Bronx in New York. And then when I moved to Mount Vernon, where I went to high school, and I started catching all kinds of hell about being light skinned.
Yeah.
But as I got more involved in Black Power stuff, and particularly things revolving around the Black Panther Party, that stuff just shut down,
Yeah.
right? Because it was very clear where I stood and what my practice was.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that the issue, it's interesting to know our blood lineage. But since race is not a scientific category,
Right.
and since there's only one race on this planet, your lineage is interesting, but how you are understood politically in the system is really important, because that it is around that that you begin to construct a strategy for freedom. And if you're not clear about that, then there's problems. So I'll give you an example. When Afro Latinos come to the United States, and not even straight up Afro Latinos, Latinos that have some African blood, in their homelands, they may not have been described as Black.
Right.
They might have had some other description. But they come to the United States and they become Black.
Right. Right.
And for many of them, that is a very troubling evolution. And sometimes they adamantly want to deny that,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And say, well, no, I'm not African. I don't have an African blood. I have Taino blood in me,
Right.
from the indigenous in the Caribbean. Despite the fact that the Tainos were wiped out within, I think, about 50 years after Columbus got there. Um, or you have other such things, because people run away from their African blood and they don't want to be identified with the oppressed.
That's that's the thing I want to point to. It is at the end of the day, even when you're confronted with what you're saying, these immigrants come over and they're confronted with a new political categorization. These are human constructed political categorizations, and it
Right.
it doesn't jibe with them. Um, I'm interested in that choice. Like some percentage of people say yes and love the idea of blackness as a political as an affiliation with the struggle against racial oppression, and others do the exact opposite. And you see
That's right.
this, you see, there's a whole industry of skin lightening and other kinds of like things
That's right.
to avoid that connection. But at the end of the day, it's a political affiliation. It's
Yeah.
and for me, I identify without a doubt with that struggle and with blackness. And as I'm a black man, I also have an issue with, I want to imagine, I want to dream the way that you talked about dreaming. And I want to create art, and I want to lead conversations, and I want to be able to transcend the idea that blackness equates struggle in this same way.
Mhm.
I have a friend. I've talked about him in a different episode. A black friend who posts on Facebook frequently, where his energy and his political capital, his creativity, the words he comes up with ways to chastise women, black women. He comes up with ways to chastise gay people. And when I say to him, yo, there's a whole bunch of white people and Republicans and liberal Democrats and uh, all kinds of political issues that you could point your energy towards. And we got into a battle for a couple of days. And eventually he got to this point where he said, yo, I'm just a black man in America, is what he said to me. And it was a revelation about how he feels about himself, what it means to be a black man in America. He doesn't have power in these other arenas. These things you trying to tell him to worry about Israel and worry about blah 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 and other parts of the world, Western Sahara and this and that. He's not interested in that. He doesn't have power there. What he can do is he can tell gay people to come to God and stop being what they are, and tell women to stop shaking their butts. Black women in particular need to stop shaking their butts and get married, and that's where his power is. And this is his construction in his mind. It was kind of like I had to take a couple breaths and like think about like what we just had in that discourse. So for him and for myself, because I see it in myself too. I'm not trying to pretend like I'm outside of this. And for everyone, like this definition of black as something that is related to struggle and also related to powerlessness and related to a limited scope of influence. I want to jettison that, and I'm interested in like how we do that. What do you think of that?
So your friend um, is living in an apartment building. He doesn't know it,
Mm-hmm.
and he's on the third floor. When he gets on the elevator, he can't go any higher than the third floor. At least that's what he thinks,
That's what he thinks.
right? But because he's on the third floor, he feels like he can pound on his floor and dance all night, despite the fact that it's keeping everyone awake that is sleeping and living beneath him, because that's his power. Because he has decided or concluded that he can't get any further up in that building.
Right.
And maybe one day he comes in and they let him go to the sixth floor. Wow. And now he can pound as much as he wants on those bottom five floors.
Mm.
He could stop the elevator on the second floor and let out a scream at 2 a.m, and no one will do anything to him because he lives on the sixth floor. See, that's the way the system works. And that's one of the things that the far right is doing right now, that to African Americans and to Latinos and Latinas in particular, they're basically saying, we can find a place for you as long as you don't challenge who's sitting on the top floors. We'll give you a place, and you
Yeah.
can stomp on those gays and lesbians. You can enjoy the Trump misogyny,
Yep.
and it gets applauded. But keep in mind, you can't go any higher than the sixth floor,
That's right.
right? That's the way the apartheid system actually worked in South Africa. I mean,
Yeah.
what people often forget about the apartheid system, Billy, is that it wasn't it would never have succeeded had it just been white people standing over black folks.
Mm.
They needed intermediate groups.
Yeah.
They needed to create South Asians at a certain category, to have mixed race people, to have various black Africans, using that right loosely,
Yeah.
in that, and have some levels of authority. When you would look at the apartheid army before 1994, it wasn't just white folks,
Right.
right? And so that's the way the oppressor is very successful. So your friend, with all due respect, has basically decided he is cool with being on the third floor. And one of the things about being there is that he can't see very much when he looks out the window either,
Hmm. Hmm.
because it's blocked.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a crazy thing, and it's to me, he was able to. It took days to get there, but he was able to finally articulate an underlying deep-seated truth that is at the core of his being. And I had to be honest about how pervasive that likely is, even in myself and in so many of us. um but yeah, the apartheid, the ways that these stories we have exist in all of us. And to me, I'm what excites me is the potential to kind of tell a different story. Like, we can all kind of, we can attach ourselves to different narratives, if we're so bold, and if we have enough resources and support to do so. This is an individualistic thing. This isn't a social thing that I'm talking about. But I do think on an individual level, we have the capacity to try to sort of access a different story.
Yes, but that's why I wouldn't use the term the truth. These aren't truths.
Hmm.
People are discovering. There was a great science fiction movie, a very classic, called Forbidden Planet. Came out in like 1956, um, with Leslie Nielsen, Walter Pidgeon, um, and Francis. I'd strongly recommend it. Very well done, even you looking at it now. And without going through the whole storyline, at a certain point, they realize that a machine that one of them was exposed to heightened their intelligence, but also heightened their subconscious. And that within their subconscious, there were monsters.
Mm.
And they end up being called monsters from the id. And basically, what they meant by that was that within all of us, there are fears, there are hatreds that we have accepted, adopted, and um, in many cases suppressed, but they're there.
Hmm.
Your friend stumbled across one of those monsters. And the question is, when you stumble across the monster, what do you do?
Right.
Do you let the monster consume you, or do you destroy that monster?
Right. Right. To me,
That's a challenge.
it is a challenge. To me, it's powerful to even first notice a monster, right? Because some of us can go our whole lives without even noticing
That's right.
the monster. Or, of course, we're talking about multiple monsters. I find that I can speak to my own experience of multiple monsters. How much time, by the way, do we have with you, Bill? Can I have you for
How much time do you need?
just another 10 minutes or so? Because
Oh, that's fun.
okay, great. Because we just hit an hour, so I just wanted to like ask that.
Yeah,
But
that's fine.
like, to first notice the monsters, and then to take the steps to actually challenge and to notice that they're not real in the same way. When you said the truth thing, they're not real, but you have to walk into it.
That's
You know,
right.
I really feel that my life changed. I have these several points in my life where I feel like my life changed, but one moment was I left this job that I had, this corporate job in the media, and I left and I took my camera and I got on Instagram and I said, I'm not going to have to think 3 and 4 times before I have to say the words that I want to say. I don't live in a world where I have to think so hard to prevent offending XYZ. That changed everything. I feel like before that, I operated in a sense that I really need to be mindful of party affiliation, everything, racial things, religious concerns and all this stuff. And I was really walking on eggshells through life. And I feel like this was a monster that I just happened to be able to walk through. And I feel like I wanted to talk about that. To me, this I'm pointing at something that is almost spiritual, Bill. What do you think about what I'm saying there?
I think that um, that this becomes very complicated because what you experienced as liberating can also release some monsters,
For sure.
right? And that is actually what Trump has done. He is he has released some monsters. When Trump did that Access Hollywood audio, where he was talking about grabbing women in their genitals, his ratings went up, right?
Yeah, it did.
And because basically he released a monster that a lot of men were feeling, and the monsters didn't get challenged.
Hmm.
So when you describe what you just said, I would say that if you release the monsters, but you corral them, then you have a chance of becoming a human being,
I love that.
right?
It's the balance.
Yeah,
It's the paradox.
right,
Release but hold. It is detach but care.
right.
It is that to me is a powerful archetypal figure. The person who can do that. You brought up Trump,
Yeah,
so can we talk about
yeah.
this apparent assassination attempt and what it means politically and all the madness that ensues now?
So, Billy, I have all these feelings about this. So let's just start by my being in opposition to political violence.
Mm,
Um, I'm very much in favor of self-defense, but assassinations and stuff like that, no. Um, but going beyond that, the circumstances around this assassination attempt are very, very odd. And I want to come back to that. The second thing is that this is going to be very helpful for Trump in the election, although we're several months away. So a lot of
right.
things can happen.
Yeah.
Um, but Trump and the whole Republican Party are going to milk this
Yeah.
for as much as they can. And it's really interesting because, his now running mate, J.D. Vance, said the other day that um, Trump, that the attack on Trump was directly the responsibility of Biden because Biden had talked about uh, putting a bullseye on Trump. And I'm saying, wait a minute, do you think we're stupid? I mean, it's like when you look at January 6th, when you look at what's happened since, when you looked at this idiot that's running for governor in North Carolina, a black guy, allegedly, who is calling was recorded giving a speech talking about the need to kill people, right? When you think about Trump's response to the attack on Nancy Pelosi and her husband
Right.
and the way he mocked it, right?
Right.
So what the right wing is trying to do is seize upon this and try to flip the script and put progressives and liberals on the defensive. Um, it's really important in a time like this that we do not capitulate to the narrative that there's extremism on both sides, and that we just have to tone down the rhetoric. No, we don't need to tone down the rhetoric. We need to tone down the right. I mean, these folks have been threatening civil war repeatedly, at least since Trump was elected in 2016, and then after that. But the circumstances of this assassination attempt, going back full circle, Billy, are just weird. You got this guy, this 20-year-old white guy, who's a Republican, who's also a gun enthusiast, and he couldn't shoot straight either. And it's like, and so, one bystander gets killed, two are wounded. Trump by his ear. I mean, there's just something about this whole thing that feels weird. And I don't want to go into conspiracy theories. I'm trying to stay away from that. But
I see you trying to stay away from it.
I really am, man. I really am. But I just think it's weird. And I think that it's correct for people to ask questions about what really happened. But this incident is absolutely to the benefit of the Republicans.
Yeah. Especially just the way this image and performance conscious culture is. I mean, he managed to squeak out this great shot
Oh
of
my
him in
God.
front of the ear bleeding, fist up in
Yeah.
the air. It's all very performative. To me, honestly, Bill, there's so much going on, bro. I I find strength in this is all absurd. We're clearly in an absurd video game or an absurd like hear me out. This is serious and I know I don't want to like pretend it's not serious. At the same time, the levels of absurdity, anyone who thinks that we have any grapple on this political realm, this realm that we think is rational or that our systems are rational and are responding to the needs of people here or there, over and over we see that it's not the case. And I find freedom in not trying to make sense of it and to just kind of like call out what is and to let myself be free in a realm that is full of absurdity, in a realm that has like someone like Ben Shapiro recently speaking before Congress, Trump running for president, JD Vance his running mate, Biden and his condition, which isn't great, which doesn't seem to be totally great. And Kamala Harris and all of these things are like, oh my gosh, this is something out of an absurdist fictional movie or something. I don't even know where to make sense of it anymore, other than to try to walk a path of like integrity and try to make sense for myself, but like really be free of expectation beyond that. And that's where I am with yeah.
So this goes to an ongoing discussion you and I have had. I'm constantly trying to make sense out of it, in part because I'm a what my wife calls a history communicator. That I talk with people about history and about current events and trying to help people make sense out of what's going on in order to develop a strategy. And part of what we're witnessing is the result of a particular kind of crisis that we're facing on a planetary level. And then some of the specifics in the United States. So one of the things that you can see in US history is that there is there are periods of a ruling class consensus about how to rule, and pretty much everybody abides by the game for a while. And then that consensus breaks down, usually the result of a combination of struggle from below as well as external factors.
Right.
And the Civil War was obviously one big breakdown.
Can I interject something here?
Yeah,
This ruling class system is inherently sort of unnatural. Is that correct? It's inherently not. It is a construct of power, which then eventually has to come into conflict with nature, with the fullness of nature, sort of.
right, because of the law of contradiction, that things are in contradiction, and the class system, I wouldn't say it's unnatural, it's historic, but it is fundamentally problematic because precisely because it has this artificial differentiation in the population that's imposed by people at the top.
Hmm.
And but the trick is, it's like that saying from the end of the movie The Usual Suspects. He said, "The greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing people he didn't
Didn't
exist."
exist. Yep.
Right? And that is really true about capitalism, and in other ways, other class systems. And for a while after World War II and up through, certainly up through the end of the Cold War, there was a certain kind of consensus, but the consensus started breaking down in the 70s as a result of the growth of neoliberalism, this kind of capitalist fundamentalism. And then it really breaks down when the Soviet Union collapses and China goes down its way. Um, but then you add on to that, Billy, the environmental crisis. And, you know, living in 6, 7 degree above average temperatures day after day, and what that does. So people are looking for answers. And the rulers in different ways are trying to provide them. And what the far right is doing is it with scapegoats.
Yes.
And
Yes.
part of our job, I would argue, without telling you what to do, is to help regular people make sense of this and figure out what needs to be done. How can we emancipate ourselves from, collectively, from a barbaric and increasingly barbaric. I mean, when we're looking at things like this Project 2025, this thing is really scary in terms of what Trump is looking at. And the fact that a year from now, you and I might both be dead or in prison somewhere. And there's a lot of denial about that. Although fortunately, there's an increased awareness that these maniacs are serious.
What are you pointing to that makes you say that we might be dead? I know this from having conversations with friends of mine or people I know, white Trump supporters, that they're not exactly there, and their excitement for Trump is weird. They have the weird latent excitement for a civil war and all of that.
Right,
But
right.
is that what you're pointing to, or is there something in Project 25 that you're 2025 that you're pointing to?
I'm glad you raised that. It's actually both. It's this sort of irrationalism and worship of violence within the MAGA base, but which is sort of what I call extrajudicial violence.
Yeah.
And then there's actually what's in Project 2025, which is really calling for rule by decree. And what Trump is promising in terms of imprisoning people that he viewed as opponents and traitors. So he could do, and particularly given what the Supreme Court did with that ridiculous ruling that he can basically do anything as long as it's an official action. He could rule that you and I are subversives. And boom.
It's true that Biden can do that as well, correct? Or any other president going forward.
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly.
And that's all absurd. I mean, it's just an absurd.
But we've got to prevent that, and we've got to move away. We keep driving on the edge of the precipice. I don't know whether you've ever been up in a mountain, like where there was like no guardrails.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's how it feels like we're living. We're driving, and there's no guardrails, but you look to your right,
Yeah,
and it's a long way down.
yeah,
We got to move from that.
yeah. I agree, Bill. Man, I could talk with you for hours, man, but I know I only have you for a short time. I've had you for an hour and 20 now.
It's been great.
I really appreciate your time, Bill. Thanks so much. I'll just give you if you have a last thing you want to say, because I wish I could follow up on what you're saying. Keep going, but I want to maybe schedule you for another time. But
Oh no, we should do it another time.
definitely. So
Yeah, and I just want to say I really appreciated your inviting me on to talk about the books.
great.
And I want to say that when I first wrote my first novel, Billy, um, there were many people that did not take me seriously.
Hmm.
And they would make comments that were along the lines of like, what do you got extra time in your hands?
Mm.
And they would treat the whole thing as frivolous. And then when the first one came out and people liked it, some of those same people would say to me very quietly, Bill, how'd you write that book? There's a book I'd actually like to write.
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
That's what it
And
is.
and I never did any I told you so, right? I'd
Mhm.
always take that and really encourage people to write. So
Yes.
part of what I'd say to your viewers and listeners is most of us have at least one story
Yes.
in our heads, at least one, and we don't take the chance of writing it because we put ourselves down
Hmm.
and we say, "Oh, I'll never be as good as Octavia Butler. I'll never be as good as Walter Mosley,
Yeah.
right? I'll never be as good as Kim Stanley Robinson." And that's true. You won't be. You won't be. But you will be you.
That's right.
And you actually might even be better than them.
That's
But you
right.
have to find your own path. And that's one of the things that I've learned first in learning how to do public speaking, Billy. Because I used to always want to speak like Malcolm X, and I couldn't. I tried, bro. And it just always came out. And finally I realized that I couldn't speak like Malcolm X because I wasn't Malcolm X.
Bill Fletcher Jr.
I was Bill Fletcher.
Yeah.
And once I realized that, I then realized at a certain juncture, I was developing my own style,
Yes.
which is very unique. And the same is true with writing. And I say that to your viewers and listeners. Try it.
That's huge.
Write a short story. Just write it. Don't compare yourself to somebody. Just
Huge.
do it.
Especially now we have so many, things at our fingertips to either write or any other expression of the internal
Exactly.
expression. Let it out and be free.
Right.
And I think the world needs it even. The world
Yes.
not only wants it, they need it. Bill,
All right.
you're the man. Thanks very much, bro. Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Pleasure.
All right.
Take care.
We'll talk soon. Peace.
Very
Fool's Journey. Name ring bells, barriers sound broken. The pain grows till the veins open. Chosen, no matter how you slice it up. Same quotient, cook all summer. Flame throwing, we all in like fam, just prayed over it. Hands move in the same motion, chain smoking. The wave ocean is, wait, let me start over. Eyes won't blink, I stay woken. How the words so deep or plain spoken. Spitting that raw medicine, insane dosage. The price is way up like a change token. Lyrically, brain lotion, slick, but I ain't boasting. Living these mundane moments, sipping a strange potion. My rhyme's coldest when I stay focused. I pen a poem, leave your brain jolted. Too many fake poses, forgot this king culture. Carry the weight like I got 8 shoulders. My 16 bars is hard, my 32 doing the mostest. Double my inner searching, found the same culprit. Damn. What if I'm limitless though? Yeah, I source metaphors from motherlands. Soon as I think I understand another land's, wait, come again? News coverage is too troubling. Clowns stuck in their heads like the son of Sam. Turn me up round 9-7, summer jam. Toss a dumb fuck in a gutter can. Stuttering, they can't stomach it. Eating MCs and I'm loving it. Billy the process, not my government. The team hustling, these fools rushing in. I pour out for my people. They all got questions about my publishing. Pay attention with extreme caution. Type of nigga to shadow box and connect with his dreams often. The man flow like a stream faucet. Awesome. I shoot flame fire, breathe awesome. I leap forward and every step is invested as a seed garden. All directions towards each corner. The peace offering is now. Cradle to coffin. We started, cause we limitless.